Brandon AIYUK begged the Commanders for a shot on Instagram, no contract, nothing signed, and it forced Adam Peters to answer live. Sources out of Ashburn say he didn't say no, and in a second I'll tell you why Jaden Daniels is at the center of this. Ben Sinnott finally got the scheme built for him under David Blau, but $27 million on Chigo Konko could bury him on the bench again. And day one of camp already claimed two names, Allegretti and BURKS. And one of those hits just opened the door for a rookie, Rays Hales. This week the NFL's official training camps opened, and almost every team had its players report like normal. Almost every team. Brandon AIYUK did not report to the San Francisco 49ers. And he also didn't complete any formal move to Washington, because that deal, and I want to be crystal clear about this right off the top, does not exist yet. What does exist is a 26-year-old wideout with real talent stuck in a contract limbo of his own making, sending public messages of affection to a team that isn't his. AIYUK wrote on his Instagram story something like, "Good luck to the Commanders starting camp today, praying for great health and great vibes. Trophy emoji included. Fam, that gesture carries intent. That's a man knocking on the door from the outside." Let's go to the base situation, because some of you got to this saga late and need the full context. AIYUK has spent months in open warfare with the 49ers front office. He publicly criticized head coach Kyle Shanahan. He publicly criticized general manager John Lynch, and the Niners for their part have already made it crystal clear they're not counting on him. Lynch put him on the left squad list, which in plain terms means AIYUK isn't even on San Francisco's 90-man active roster right now. And Lynch was even more direct in recent comments, saying essentially that the player has already played his last snap for the organization. When your own team's general manager says that publicly, there isn't much room left for reinterpretation. AIYUK needs to formally apply for reinstatement with the league before any other team can even start negotiating for him. And as of today, July 30th, that application still hasn't been filed as far as we know. Here's the connection that makes this a real Commander story and not just a generic free agency rumor. AIYUK and Jaden Daniels played together at Arizona State before Daniels transferred to LSU. They're actually friends, not some connection a reporter invented out of thin air for summer content. And that friendship is exactly why this story won't die down, even though it probably should. Washington did have interest in AIYUK earlier in the offseason. Reports indicated a possible deal was on the table, though the Commanders were never actively shopping for a trade for him. The question all of us are asking is simple. Is that interest still alive after all the social media circus AIYUK has put on over the past few weeks? And here's the part that really worries me as a fan, because AIYUK hasn't just been criticizing the Niners. He also threw shade at Jaden Daniels on social media at some point recently. Now, I don't have the full context of that exchange, and it would be dishonest of me to make it up. But the detail is out there, confirmed by several outlets that cover this team day to day. And that changes the conversation completely, because if there's any real bad blood between AIYUK and this team's franchise quarterback, then this whole public romance AIYUK is building on social media falls apart on its own. A wide receiver can have all the talent in the world, and AIYUK has it, but if there's no chemistry or respect with your quarterback, that talent never gets unlocked. We've seen it happen with far bigger name receivers on other franchises. General manager Adam Peters already got asked about this directly this week, and his answer struck me as revealing, even though it was diplomatic to the extreme. He was asked whether social media behavior affects how a player gets evaluated, a question that obviously pointed at AIYUK without saying his name. And Peters answered that it's a good roundabout question, and that in Washington they look at everything. Listen to that phrase closely. We look at everything. That's not a yes. It's not a no either. That's a smart general manager leaving the door slightly open without committing to anything, which is exactly what a smart GM should do in a situation like this. Peters knows AIYUK from his time in San Francisco, so he's not evaluating a stranger here. And that prior history probably weighs more than any random tweet. Now let's talk about the wild theories floating around, because one of them made me laugh out loud. There are reports, including a fairly buzzed about tweet from a local reporter, suggesting scenarios where AIYUK shows up physically at the Commanders facility without a contract, basically standing among the fans yelling at the front office to sign him. Look, that sounds like social media comedy more than an actual strategy from a player who wants to be taken seriously. And honestly, if AIYUK did something like that, I think it would backfire completely. It would look desperate, and in the NFL, public desperation almost never improves your negotiating position. If anything, it gives San Francisco even more reason not to lift a finger for him, because it would make it obvious AIYUK doesn't have a credible plan B. My honest take, and I could be wrong here, is this. I think the Commanders should have AIYUK on the radar because the need at the number 2 receiver spot is real. Noah Brown ended up on injured reserve. Terry McLaurin remains this team's clear number 1 receiver, but his durability history has raised legitimate concerns over the past few years, and the rest of the group, with all due respect, is made up of pieces that still have to prove themselves at the NFL level. A receiver of AIYUK's caliber, healthy, motivated, and playing next to an actual friend at quarterback could be exactly the missing piece this offense needs to take a real jump in 2026. But is huge. Adam Peters cannot and should not become the general manager who rescues every problematic player in the league just because of talent. This team spent years carrying the reputation of a place where talent goes to self-destruct because of culture and locker room issues. Peters showed up specifically to change that culture, not to recycle it with new names. If AIYUK wants to play for the Commanders, the message has to come through actions, not Instagram stories. File for reinstatement. Stop throwing subtle shots at your potential quarterback. And let the normal negotiation process, whether it's a trade or a release into free agency, play out without any more drama. If AIYUK does that, Washington should be in this conversation seriously. If he keeps up the public show, then this story becomes a distraction that neither Jaden Daniels nor Dan Quinn needs 2 weeks before the real regular season kicks off. What this means for us as a fan base. Keep following this story closely, but don't get emotionally married to it yet. I've watched this community get excited about signings that never happened, and I'd rather you enjoy the real training camp, the one that's actually happening in front of our eyes right now, instead of staying glued to an Instagram story that might turn into nothing at all. Okay, total tone shift, because I need to talk about something that actually has me excited about this team's real football, not social media rumors. Let's talk about Ben Sinnott, and I need you to listen closely, because I think the public conversation about this tight end has been lazy for 2 full years. Sinnott's raw numbers are honestly ugly. 16 catches for 142 yards combined across his first 2 seasons. That's for a player drafted in the 2nd round back in 2024. When a team invests a 2nd round pick in a tight end, the bare minimum expectation is that player becomes at least a consistent rotational contributor by year 3. As a rookie in 2024, he had just 5 catches for 28 yards, basically invisible. And through the first 13 weeks of 2025, the story looks similar, with only 1 game topping 50% of offensive snaps against the Raiders in week 3, capping out at 56.9%. But here's a detail almost nobody brings up that I think is crucial. When Zach Ertz tore his ACL in week 14, Sinnott topped 50% of snaps in each of the final 4 games of the season, hitting a career high 68% against the Eagles, and caught 7 of 9 targets for 73 yards in that closing stretch. When he actually got the real opportunity, Sinnott answered with real production, not excuses. But here's the part most of the public conversation skips over entirely. That problem was never exclusively Sinnott's fault. It was also a scheme problem. Former offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury simply didn't design plays that put Sinnott in positions to use his actual skill set. Kingsbury leaned on Ertz for experience and chemistry with Jaden Daniels, which made sense short term, but it left Sinnott stuck without any real chance to develop. Now David Blau steps in as the new offensive coordinator, and this is what has me set on realistic expectations, not inflated ones. Blau built his offensive philosophy around outside zone runs combined with play action, a system he developed working alongside Ben Johnson in Detroit before Johnson became the Bears head coach. And Sinnott himself explained it in his own words recently. He said this offense is based on outside zone play action, and that's exactly what he feels he's very good at, running without the ball, moving around, lining up in different spots to use his skill set. That quote sounds like a player who's finally seeing a scheme built for his specific type of athlete, not empty public relations talk. Let me break down why this actually matters tactically, because there's a motion rate stat almost nobody is bringing up that I think is central to this whole story. Kingsbury's 2025 offense had a motion rate, meaning players moving before the snap, of just 49.3%. That was the 8th lowest rate in the entire league. Compare that to Ben Johnson's Bears, the same direct influence on Blau, who posted a motion rate of 60.6% last season. That gap isn't cosmetic. Motion creates mismatches. It forces the defense to reveal whether they're in zone or man coverage, and it gives a player like Sinnott, who's at his best with the ball in his hands and space in front of him, exactly the kind of advantage he needs to produce. Former Commanders tight end Logan Paulson explained it perfectly on a recent podcast. He said when you watch SINNOTT at Kansas State, you see him running corner routes, post routes, high crossers, and seam routes. All routes with a clear vertical stem, and what you don't see from him is a lot of short area choice route or snag route type work. That tells me SINNOTT is, by nature, a vertical, open space athlete, not a short area, dirty work tight end. And Blau's scheme, with more motion and more outside zone, fits that profile almost perfectly. Now, let's be fair and talk about the real obstacle, because I don't want to sell you a fairy tale without mentioning the main problem. Washington invested real money in Okonkwo in free agency this year, specifically to get an immediate impact receiving tight end. It got reported as a deal worth up to $30 million over 3 years, but the actual structure per over the cap runs $27 million with $16.7 million fully guaranteed. That's a serious financial commitment to one specific player for one specific role, not filler money to keep a seat warm. Okonkwo arrives with the label of being the position's effective number 2 receiver, while John Bates remains the group's primary blocker. That leaves SINNOTT competing for space in a 3 tight end group where 2 roles already look defined. And analyst Zach Selby, writing for Commanders.com, was honest about it. He said the coaching staff likes SINNOTT's abilities as an open space blocker and wants to get him more involved in the game plan, without specifying exactly what more involved means in concrete numbers. And here's my full honest opinion, no filter, because I want to be critical instead of just optimistic. My take is that closing stretch, the 4 straight games over 50% snaps, and the 7 catches on 9 targets wasn't a fluke or garbage time production against teams that had already checked out. That was real proof that when SINNOTT actually gets real minutes, he produces. So I think this summer's hype has some real foundation, though I also think it's a little inflated by the new scheme fixes everything narrative, which is one of the most worn out and least reliable narratives in July football. Yes, the scheme fits him better. Yes, the motion helps. But Okonkwo arrived with $27 million real dollars, 16.7 guaranteed, and the specific label of being the primary receiving tight end. That investment doesn't disappear because Blau says nice things to the press. If I had to bet today, July 30th, I'd say SINNOTT improves his production noticeably, something like 40 catches, 450 yards, and around 5 touchdowns if everything breaks right, but that he stays the 3rd name in the tight end rotation behind Okonkwo as the receiver and Bates as the blocker. That would actually be the best season of his career, far from any bust label. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking he becomes this position's number 1 lead player in 2026, and here's where I'm going to stubbornly hold my ground. Okonkwo's guaranteed money outweighs 4 good games from SINNOTT at the end of last season, no matter how real that production was. The real ceiling still depends on Blau finding 2 tight end packages where SINNOTT and Okonkwo are on the field at the same time, forcing the opposing defense to pick which one to ignore. And that decision, designing those packages with real frequency, is something we haven't seen yet in an actual game. And to close it out, a quick injury note. I don't want to blow out of proportion because both look manageable, but I do want you to understand why they matter given the real competition at 2 positions. Day 1 of training camp wasn't even over, and we already had 2 temporary losses. Nick Allegretti, this team's presumed starting center, walked off Wednesday's practice with the training staff, and Dan Quinn confirmed it's a calf strain. And Treylon Burks, the receiver who arrived last year looking to rebuild his career after a disappointing run in Tennessee, couldn't even finish day 2 because of foot soreness. Quinn was clear on both. He doesn't expect either injury to become a long-term issue. And I believe him because Quinn doesn't usually downplay serious injuries in public. He tends to be straight up when something's actually bad. But here's the angle that actually matters for us as analysts of this team. The center position is completely open after Washington released Tyler Biadasz. Allegretti came into this camp as the presumed number 1 option after playing there the final 2 games of last season when Biadasz went down with knee and ankle injuries. But Allegretti knew and still knows that job was never handed to him. Behind him sits 6th-round rookie Matt Gulbin and veteran Julian Good-Jones. And every practice Allegretti misses because of this calf injury is an extra practice of reps with Jaden Daniels for his competitors. And at the center position, those reps matter way more than at any other line spot because that's where communication, protection calls, and continuity with the quarterback get built. I'm not saying Allegretti loses the job over a calf strain, probably not, but the cushion he brought into camp just got a lot thinner overnight. My personal prediction, on the record, Allegretti opens the season as the starter, but Matt Gulbin ends up stealing real snaps before October because a 6th round rookie doesn't earn this many extra reps unless the coaching staff is seeing something they actually like. With Burks, the story is different, and honestly, a bit more concerning long term. This guy came to Washington last year specifically because his body couldn't hold up in Tennessee. He broke his foot at Titans camp a year ago, and that's the direct reason he ended up released and found a landing spot in Washington. His full track record, 33 missed games out of a possible 68 since Tennessee drafted him. That's already a pattern, not a one-time setback. And now, in his real second chance with the Commanders, in a receiver group where Noah Brown is hurt and McLaurin keeps raising durability questions, Burks hurts his foot again on day 1 of practices. I could be wrong, and I genuinely hope I am, but every time I see this player walk off a practice with physical discomfort, it gets harder to trust he can hold up for 17 full games. I hope this time is different. The talent was always there. What was never there was sustained health. AIYUK. And that's everything I've got for you today. Look, this was a strange mix of emotions. AIYUK has all of us checking our phones like closet detectives. SINNOTT gives us a real, tactically grounded reason to believe in something good coming out of this new offense. And the injuries remind us that training camp, no matter how much hype it brings, always comes with a physical cost worth watching closely. Washington has the piece at quarterback. It has the front office working, and it has, AIYUK or no AIYUK, SINNOTT breaking out or not, a roster with more real depth than in recent years. This franchise carries 90 years of history, and this summer feels different. It feels like we're finally building something sustainable instead of patching things together season after season. Raise hail, always. If this video gave you something real, hit that like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments, would you sign AIYUK today, or do you think Washington should stay far away from that drama? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.